In the Unova Pokédex, Yamask is described as a spirit that carries a mask modeled after its human face, and sometimes it looks at that mask and cries because it remembers its life. From there, we'll quietly sift through official Pokédex entries, games, anime, and developer commentary to map out the most disturbing canon details in the Pokémon world. Let it run in the background while you fall asleep, study, or just zone out to long-form Pokémon lore. Yamask is one of the rare Pokémon where the games almost stop pretending this is just fantasy biology. The Unova Pokédex states outright that each Yamask used to be a human, and the mask it carries is modeled after its face from when it was alive. When it gazes at the mask, it remembers its former life and cries, which raises a quiet question the game never answers. How much of that human is still in there? Most ghost stories leave room to wonder whether a spirit really remembers being alive. With Yamask, there is no ambiguity. The text insists this is a person who died and is now classified as a Pokémon species. It's not a metaphor, not a rumor from an NPC, but the main encyclopedia for the region flatly labeling former humans as part of the Pokédex. That single detail carries a disturbing implication. If Yamask is a known species, then the people in that world have cataloged and studied human souls as something you can encounter in the wild. It suggests there are enough of them that you can catch them in Pokéballs, train them, and bring them to battle as if they were just another entry in a living field guide. The design reinforces the text. Yamask's mask is smooth and stylized, but clearly meant to be a face, with hollow eyes and a frozen expression. Because the Pokédex insists it reflects the person's actual appearance, you're meant to imagine that somewhere out there, grieving relatives might recognize one. The games never let you meet Yamask's family. No NPC runs up to you begging to see the mask of their lost loved one, and that absence quietly makes things worse. It implies that once a human becomes a Yamask, they're effectively written off as a different form of life, even though the person inside remembers everything. Later generations expanded on this idea with Galarian Yamask, and that variation adds another layer of unease. Instead of a carved face, Galarian Yamask drags around a stone tablet portion cursed with ancient runes. It suggests a spirit tied not just to its own life, but to a long-buried history of suffering embedded in the relic it's forced to carry. Then there's Cofagrigus, the evolved form that turns the human soul into an ornate gold sarcophagus. According to various Pokédex descriptions, Cofagrigus swallows grave robbers whole and turns their bodies into mummies. The body count around this line of Pokémon is left vague, but the fact that humans know to fear it shows the stories are common knowledge. When you combine these entries, a pattern forms. Humans in the Pokémon world have confirmed that after death, they can come back as wandering spirits, as mask-carrying wraiths, or as animated coffins that punish the living. You can still walk into a Pokémon Center, heal them, and send them back into battle, as if this were perfectly normal. Phantump is another case where the lore stops hiding behind implication and simply tells you a tragedy. The Pokédex explains that Phantump is the spirit of a child who died after getting lost in a forest, now possessing a rotting tree stump. It means every Phantump you meet is not just a ghost, but specifically a lost child whose death is common enough to be treated as a species definition. Forests are usually depicted as serene routes between towns, filled with bug-type Pokémon and gentle background music. Hidden under that is the knowledge that somewhere, a child wandered too far, died alone, and had their spirit fuse with a decaying branch. Trainers then catch that spirit, teach it moves, and send it into battles without ever talking about whose life it used to be. The design details make that story linger. Phantump's hat of dead wood rests like a broken stump on a small, hovering body, with big, hollow eyes. Those eyes don't look fierce or vengeful. They look lonely, which matches the idea of a child who never made it back home. In fan discussions, Phantump is often paired with Trevenant, its evolved form, which canonically protects the forest and punishes those who harm it. The unsettling twist is that Trevenant is treated as a guardian spirit, but its origin is still a dead child's soul. Nature in this world is literally policed by the restless spirits of people who didn't survive it. Drifloon, on the other hand, takes the opposite approach. Instead of being the victim of the forest, it's the one stalking children, disguised as something harmless and inviting. The Pokédex tells you that Drifloon grabs the hands of kids who think it's a balloon, and then tries to drift away with them. There are variations between regions, but the core idea stays the same. Drifloon lures children. Sometimes the text suggests it brings them to the afterlife, and sometimes that it just carries them away and they're never seen again. Either way, the games treat this as a known behavior, written down in an official research device that professors hand to 10-year-olds. Drifloon's design is deliberately simple and cute. Its round purple body, little cross-shaped mouth, and cloud-like fluff make it look like a floating toy. The yellow strips meant to resemble hands or strings complete the metaphor. You are supposed to recognize it as the kind of object a child might reach for. That visual innocence contrasted with the Pokédex description is where the horror really sits. In-universe, parents would have to warn their kids not to trust balloons floating around on their own near certain routes. It's a world where don't take candy from strangers quietly extends to don't grab the hand of the cute ghost that wants to take you away. Drifloon, its evolved form, expands the scale of the threat. The Pokédex mentions that Drifloon sometimes carries people and Pokémon far away, and those passengers are occasionally never found again. The large, blimp-like silhouette drifting in the sky becomes something that could represent a missing person case instead of a simple encounter icon. Ghost types in general often have entries that sound like folklore, but the games treat them as factual field notes. Duskull's descriptions talk about it being attracted to the sound of crying children and joyfully chasing those who misbehave. It can pass through walls, which means the safest house in the region can still be invaded by a grinning, skull-shaped spirit if it decides to visit. Parents in a world like that are aware that the supernatural doesn't respect locks or alarms. The stories they tell to scare kids into behaving are backed up by a national research database that confirms these beings exist. When the Pokédex says Duskull enjoys scaring people at night, it isn't sharing a myth, it's logging habitual behavior. Litwick's line introduces a slightly different kind of horror, one that masquerades as guidance. Litwick is said to light the way for people and Pokémon, but its flame secretly absorbs their life energy. The brighter the candle burns, the more it has fed, a detail that transforms a cozy light source into a sign that someone nearby is being drained. Lampent raises the stakes by explicitly hunting the moment of death. According to multiple regional entries, Lampent appears when someone is about to die and steals their spirit as it leaves the body. It is drawn to hospitals, not as a symbol of hope, but as a scavenger waiting for a steady supply of souls. Chandelure takes that predatory behavior to its extreme. Its spectral flames are said to burn the spirit, not the body, leaving people as empty shells. In some entries, it's suggested that those who look at the swinging flames have their souls sucked out, losing themselves while their body remains behind. This isn't just a spooky story told around campfires. Chandelure is used by trainers, including Elite Four members, and is part of ordinary competitive battles. You can imagine arenas filled with spectators cheering as a chandelier-shaped Pokémon uses moves whose flavor text involves destroying opponents' very essences. Even Gengar, one of the franchise's mascot ghost types, has entries that blur the line between prankster and predator. It's described as hiding in shadows and duplicating a person's appearance to approach a target. Its presence causes surrounding temperatures to drop sharply, and some entries suggest that if you feel a sudden chill, it might be a Gengar about to pounce. Other descriptions hint that Gengar once was a human, or at least a shadow of something human-shaped, which ties it into the broader theme of ghosts as former people. The idea of your own shadow detaching and becoming a separate being taps into a very old kind of fear. In Pokémon, it's not a metaphor. It's a species you can catch with a standard ball and order around. From a gameplay standpoint, ghost types are balanced like any other type, with weaknesses, resistances, and movesets. The unsettling disconnect is that their canonical lore treats them as active participants in people's deaths and afterlives. The same party menu that lists HP and moves is, in several cases, also managing the continued existence of human souls. The anime occasionally leans into this darkness while still toning it down for broadcast. Episodes featuring Litwick or Drifloon usually soften the fatal aspects, but they don't erase them entirely. When something like Lampent hangs around a hospital in the games, it's treated as a curiosity. In animation, it becomes an unspoken visual metaphor for death. Within the community, ghost-type Pokédex entries are a recurring topic of conversation. Whenever a new generation releases, players often rush to check the ghost entries first to see how far the writers have pushed the horror this time. Yamask and Phantom frequently resurface in discussions about how surprisingly dark the series can be, while maintaining an everyone rating. The fact that these details are official is what separates them from typical internet creepypasta. You don't have to rely on rumors or beta myths. The cartridges themselves tell you about children's souls becoming Pokémon and spirits haunting hospitals. It's all written in the same matter-of-fact tone as height, weight, and habitat. Taken together, these entries sketch out a world where death is visible, interactive, and sometimes capturable. Human souls can be encountered en routes, traded between trainers, and stored digitally on boxed PCs. The games do not dwell on the ethical implications, which might be the most disturbing part. Ghost Pokémon are also woven into everyday life, not just confined to special locations. You can find them in grave towers, abandoned houses, and even in festive areas during in-game events. The idea of a festival route filled with balloons reads differently, once you remember that some balloons want to take children away forever. When you walk through a graveyard area like the Lost Tower or Mount Pyre, you're surrounded by both gravestones and wild Pokémon battles. Players often focus on grinding experience there, but the setting's implication is that this is where spirits linger. Some of those spirits, according to the Pokédex, are not anonymous. They are specific individuals whose lives ended in fear or grief. The game never forces you to confront the backstory of the Yamask or Phantom you add to your team. Naming them, teaching them moves, and sending them into battle is presented as no different than raising a Pidgey. The disconnect between the unsettling lore and the cheerful gameplay loop becomes part of the series' quiet horror. Ghost types are also used by gym leaders and champions with no special commentary. Morty, Fantina, Acerola, and others treat their spectral partners the way any trainer treats their team. From their perspective, the disturbing details in the Pokédex don't make these Pokémon taboo. They're simply powerful allies with unusual origins. That normalization is important. It means that in-universe, people have collectively accepted that their world contains visible evidence of life after death, restless souls, and creatures that feed on those souls. Instead of sparking a crisis of faith or philosophy, it becomes a late-game grinding location and a thematic-type specialty. Every time a new game adds a ghost with a tragic backstory, it's another data point in a pattern. The writers consistently lean on themes of regret, lost children, and predatory spirits to fill out this type's roster. Yet the overall presentation stays colorful and approachable, more spooky Halloween special on the surface than existential horror. The disturbing part is not just that these facts exist, but that they're framed as trivia. Yamask crying over its old face is treated the same way as a note about a bird Pokemon's wingspan. Phantom being a dead child is delivered in the same tone used to tell you where to find berries. If you step back from the gameplay abstractions and read the entries as in-universe research notes, the world starts to feel very different. Instead of a light-hearted journey, it becomes a setting where children share routes with hungry ghosts and hospitals are haunted as a matter of course. The unease comes from realizing that the franchise never had to invent creepypastas, the cartridges shipped with their own. And ghost types are only one corner of that world. Many of the most disturbing details in the series aren't supernatural at all. They're about parasites, predation, and what happens when nature or human ambition goes too far. Those parts of the Pokédex are where we head next, into Pokémon whose bodies and lives have been twisted into something far more unsettling than their cute sprites suggest. One of the clearest examples of this was a body first, a Pokémon second, is Cubone. Its entire concept is built around grief, not battle strength or type gimmicks. The Pokédex describes it as wearing the skull of its dead mother, crying at night as it remembers her. That detail isn't hidden in some optional lore book. It's one of the very first things most players learn about Cubone, presented as a defining trait of the species. Unlike most entries which talk about diet, speed, or habitat, Cubone's summary opens with bereavement. In the original games, this is tied directly into the story of Lavender Town. You climb the Pokémon Tower, a multi-floor grave marker, fighting channelers possessed by ghosts. At the top, you meet the restless spirit of a Marowak, who died trying to protect her child from poachers. The game never says that Cubone is the specific offspring of that Marowak, but it doesn't really need to. Players connect the dots almost immediately: a baby wearing its mother's skull, a tower haunted by a murdered Marowak, and poachers who wanted her bones. You confront the ghost, calm it, and let it move on. But the Cubone left behind remains a permanently grieving species. Later generations add variations, but they never soften that core concept. Some Pokédex entries mention that Cubone's cries echo through the night and cause other Pokémon to weep. Others say that on nights when the skull fits just right, it remembers its mother more vividly, which only deepens its sadness. There's a technical disconnect between how that's written and how the games function. In battle, Cubone is just another ground type with a specific held item that makes it stronger. In the story, every Cubone is a living symbol of loss, carrying the remains of the one who raised it. The skull itself is a constant visual reminder. Unlike other held items, you never see Cubone without it. Its official art and sprites are defined by that helmet. The idea that a Pokémon's design is literally its parents' bones would be shocking in any series, let alone one that markets plush toys of the character to children. Marowak, its evolved form, takes the grief and turns it into anger or determination, depending on the interpretation. The original Kanto Marowak is still tied to the loss of its child's innocence in Lavender Town's story. Alolan Marowak, introduced much later, adopts a more overtly ghostly aesthetic, with flaming bones and a dancer-like stance. Alolan Marowak's lore says it developed its ghostly form in response to predators, turning the bones of its dead into weapons. The flames it wields are said to carry the spirit of the deceased, merging combat technique with a kind of funerary ritual. That connection between martial skill and memorializing the dead makes its battles feel more like a ceremony than simple attacks. Together, Cubone and Marowak show a world where death leaves physical artifacts that living Pokémon literally wear. Bones are not just anatomical details, they become masks, clubs, and visual identities. When you send a Marowak into battle, you're not just using a ground type, you're commanding a creature whose entire existence revolves around a grave. Parasite and Parasect push the concept of corpses in another direction, one more biological than emotional. Paras is a small crab-like bug-grass Pokémon, but the most important part of its design isn't the animal body, it's the mushrooms growing from its back. Dex entries emphasize that these mushrooms feed on the host's nutrients, gradually taking over more and more of its body. This isn't just a symbiotic relationship. The text is explicit that the mushroom is in control, even in the early Paras stage. It guides the host to damp places where spores can spread, using the body as a vehicle rather than a partner. By the time Paras evolves into Parasect, the transformation is complete. The host's eyes become blank, and the large mushroom dominates its silhouette. Pokédex descriptions describe Parasect as a creature where the fungus has fully taken over, and the original insect is essentially gone. In other words, Parasect is a puppet. The body moves, attacks, and obeys commands, but the mind behind those actions is fungal. The original animal is, for all practical purposes, dead, leaving behind an ambulatory corpse steered by a parasite. There are real-world fungi that zombify insects, but Pokémon doesn't keep this as a subtle nod to nature documentaries. It spells the process out clearly, then lets you catch, train, and use this animated husk like any other team member. The games never ask whether the Pokémon you've added to your party is the bug or the fungus. Spore-based moves and status effects become more unsettling when you remember their origin. We treat Spore as a strong sleep-inducing move for competitive battles, a tool for strategy. In-universe, those spores are components of a parasitic life cycle that eventually kills and replaces the host. If you follow that logic, the battle system effectively encourages trainers to weaponize a fungus that, if left unchecked, would produce more controlled bodies. Wild paras scattered through forests represent early-stage infections that might not all reach the parasect stage. The Pokédex quietly implies that the natural world has already lost plenty of insects to this process. Shedinja is another case where a body is technically still moving, but the soul is gone. Its origin is one of the strangest in the entire series. You obtain Shedinja when a Nincada evolves into Ninjask, and you have an extra Pokéball in your party. The discarded shell of the Nincada somehow becomes a new Pokémon, appearing in your team without the usual capture sequence. On the surface, Shedinja looks like an empty bug shell with a halo, floating lifelessly. The Pokédex leans into that, describing it as a hollow shell that doesn't breathe, move its wings, or show any visible signs of life. Despite that, it fights, learns moves, and follows commands as if something is inside. The disturbing detail is in the line about its back. Several entries warn that looking into the crack on Shedinja's back can steal your spirit. The implication is that whatever animates this husk isn't the original Nincada's mind, but something else that uses the shell as a doorway. That doorway is small but symbolically huge. It suggests a direct passage between the world of living bodies and something beyond, whether that's a spiritual plane or a kind of void. Anyone curious enough to peer inside risks losing their soul, which turns Shedinja into a kind of portable cursed artifact. Mechanically, Shedinja's well-known gimmick is its single hit point combined with the Wonder Guard ability. In battle, it either survives untouched or faints immediately depending on whether the opponent has a move that can hit it. That strange fragility mirrors the lore. It exists on a knife's edge between being present and being gone altogether. No one in the games questions how ethical it is to carry around a being that can steal spirits. Pokémon centers heal Shedinja like any other team member, even though its lore suggests it doesn't really have a living body. You're essentially restoring hit points to a corpse animated by something unseen. Frostlass blends the themes of ghosts, bodies, and harsh environments into a single design. It evolves from a Snorunt when exposed to a Dawnstone, but only if the Snorunt is female. Its Pokédex entries describe it as a spirit of a woman who died on a snow-covered mountain, now inhabiting a new form. Unlike many ghost types that have vague "it might be a spirit" wording, Frostlass is tied directly to human death. It's said to freeze men and display them as decorations in its lair, turning victims into ice sculptures. Snowstorms and blizzards are described as signs that Frostlass might be nearby, watching passers-by struggle in the cold. The inspiration is rooted in Yuki-onna legends from Japanese folklore, where a snow woman lures travelers to their doom. Pokémon translates that myth almost directly, but frames it as natural history rather than horror fiction. Once again, the Pokédex takes something from ghost stories and categorizes it in the same format as you'd use for a caterpillar. The idea of a Pokémon's lair filled with frozen bodies is rarely addressed directly in gameplay. You never walk into an ice cave and see those preserved victims as overworld sprites. Instead, the knowledge lives in the text, quietly informing how you interpret any cave, cliff, or blizzard-filled route where Frostlass might appear. Even the evolution method adds a subtle human connection. Needing a Dawn Stone and a specific gender evokes ritual and fate more than simple leveling. Frostlass is not just a random mutation, it's positioned almost like a chosen form, as if the spirit and the stone conspire to produce this new body. Taken together, Cubone, Marowak, Parasitic, Shedinja, and Frostlass form a small catalog of ways bodies can be repurposed. Some hold onto grief and memory, some become vehicles for parasites, some are literal shells for something uncanny. In every case, the physical form is just one part of the story. The real horror lies in who or what is inside. There's also a pattern in how casually these elements are treated. The games never pause to ask if it's tragic that a grieving child wears its mother's skull into battle. They never question whether Parasitic is a victim whose autonomy was stripped away, or whether Shedinja's existence is an ongoing hazard to anyone curious enough to look at it. Players are used to thinking of bones, shells, and mushroom caps as part of the aesthetic. The official art emphasizes silhouettes, colors, and recognizable features, turning all of these into marketing assets. The Pokédex quietly writes a very different story underneath those same shapes. That tension between design and description is where the series often feels most unsettling. At a glance, these Pokémon are quirky, stylized characters that fit right into merchandise and promotional art. In text, they're haunted, infected, or hollowed out, living reminders that in this universe, a body is just another resource that nature and the supernatural can recycle. The more you look, the more examples you find of Pokémon that are less animals and more states a body can be in after something terrible happens. Some are made of discarded dolls, some of old armor, some of tools used in burials. The series repeatedly returns to the idea that objects and remains can wake up, move, and keep going long after they should have come to rest. Across all of these cases, the disturbing part is not just what the individual entries say. It's the way the world seems to have adjusted to them, folding grief, parasitism, and spiritual danger into routine wildlife encounters. For trainers, these aren't taboo topics. They're just part of the field notes tucked between size, weight, and type. You can like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I'm doing here. And in the comments, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is for you. It's always cool to see this little corner of Pokémon connecting people from all over. If you read the Pokédex like a field guide instead of a stat menu, one of the first patterns you notice is how often it talks about something being eaten. Not symbolically, not as a metaphor for defeated in battle, but as actual predation, claws, teeth, poisonous barbs, and the simple reality that in this world, a lot of Pokémon exist mainly as food for something else. The games almost never show it, but the text quietly lays out an entire food web behind the cute sprites. The earliest roots in Kanto already sketch this out. Pidgey and Pidgeotto aren't just generic birds. Their entries describe them patrolling wide territories, using keen eyesight to spot small prey, and swooping down with sharp talons. Those small prey are often the very bug types and rodents you run into on the same grass tiles, meaning your team's early members are canonically in danger of being picked off. Pidgeot escalates that image from neighborhood predator to aerial apex hunter. Some Pokédex entries mention that it can fly at remarkable speeds, diving from high altitudes to snatch prey like Magikarp from the water. What looks like a majestic bird with flowing plumage is, in-universe, a specialized killing machine designed to pluck weaker creatures out of their environment without warning. Other regional birds follow a similar pattern. Spearow and Fearow are described as aggressive and territorial, attacking anything that invades their area, including humans if they feel threatened. It turns the early root flocks from harmless scenery into a reminder that in this ecosystem, wandering into the wrong patch of sky can be a bad idea. Predation isn't just a bird thing. In the oceans, Carvanha and Sharpedo are introduced as school hunters and bully Pokémon that shred anything entering their turf. Sharpedo's entries emphasize its torpedo-like body and powerful jaws, biting through ships and leaving chunks missing from boats that stray too near. Sharpedo is one of those designs where the competitive role and the lore line up disturbingly well. In battle, it's known for hitting fast and hard, often ending a fight before the opponent can react. The Pokédex describes similar behavior in the wild, where it rushes prey, tears off a large piece, and then circles back for more while blood fills the water. On coral reefs, the relationship between Marini, Toxapex, and Corsola is one of the series' most explicit predator-prey stories. Marini's entries describe it as preying on Corsola, biting off and eating its branches. Toxapex takes this further, leaving fields of scattered Corsola bits behind it as it drags its spikes along the ocean floor. With the introduction of Galarian Corsola, whose ghostly form is said to result from environmental ruin, that relationship becomes even more grim. The original Corsola is a cheerful, living reef that can be damaged by pollution and predators alike. Galarian Corsola is a ghost, a dead coral that no longer has to fear Marini because the ecosystem that supported both has already collapsed. Mandibuzz and Cubone create another small, closed loop of horror. Mandibuzz's Pokédex entries explicitly mention that it decorates its body and nest with bones of its prey. Multiple entries imply that Cubone, a species defined by its mother's skull, is one of the victims whose bones Mandibuzz likes to collect. That connection is never underlined in-game, but it's difficult to ignore. On one side, you have a small ground type carrying the skull of its mother, crying at night. On the other, a vulture-like dark flying type that swoops down, kills weaker Pokémon, and fashions their remains into ornaments. Mandybuzz's use of bones is presented as both practical and aesthetic. Some entries say that its wings are weighed down by the bones it wears, but it doesn't mind, treating them as trophies. Others describe nests built from skulls, which suggests entire generations of prey species have lived and died under its watchful eye. This isn't a one-off concept. Bones as decoration show up repeatedly in the Pokédex. Cubone and Marowak wield them as weapons and mementos. Mandibuzz uses them as status display, and other Pokémon pick its remains for food or tools. The world is full of silent visual reminders that something got eaten before you got there. Even plant Pokémon participate directly in the food chain. Victreeble's entries talk about a sweet scent that lures prey to its mouth, where they are digested over a long period. Some descriptions hint that the plant is especially fond of small Pokémon, making the tall grass itself dangerous if you're the wrong size. Carnivine performs a similar role in another region. It hangs from trees, mouth open, waiting motionless for unsuspecting prey to come close. When something touches its jaws, they snap shut, and the victim is slowly dissolved inside, a process described in textbook-like language despite its obvious horror. Those carnivorous plants exist in the same forests where kids casually walk alone with their starter Pokémon. There's no indication that routes get special safety inspections, or that wildlife is relocated away from novice trainers. Instead, the series implies that people simply learn to live with the reality that the vines over your head might be full of slowly digesting creatures. In the desert, predators like Flygon and Crocodile hold similar positions at the top of their local food chains. Crocodile's Pokédex entries describe it as a merciless hunter that buries itself in sand, waiting for prey to pass overhead before attacking. It doesn't just chase its targets, it ambushes them, pulling them underground with powerful jaws. Flygon's lore leans more into myth by calling it the spirit of the desert, but it's still associated with stirring up sandstorms that can disorient anyone caught within them. Disoriented prey are easier targets, and the storms also hide Flygon's approach. Whether it's a literal ghost or just a very well-adapted dragon, its reputation comes from the way it manipulates its environment to trap other beings. Durant and Heatmore give us a very specific predator-prey pair. Durant is a hard-working ant Pokémon that builds intricate nests and defends them fiercely. Heatmore is a specialized predator, whose Pokédex entries mention it using its long tongue to melt and eat Durant, consuming them even through their steel-like armor. This relationship is written with an almost clinical tone. Durant's steel-hard carapace is praised as a defensive adaptation, and Heatmore's body is described as a furnace designed to counter it. You could read those entries as a short evolutionary case study, if not for the fact that the result is dozens of metallic ants being melted for food. The sea has its own brutal pairings beyond Sharpedo and Maradurian. Huntail and Gorbis, two evolution paths for Clamperl, each reflect a different kind of predatory specialization. Huntail's entries mention it using its tail as bait in deep waters, luring in smaller Pokémon before swallowing them whole, while Gorbis pierces targets and drains bodily fluids in a manner that sounds more like a leech than a fish. Even movesets support the image of a hostile ocean. Bite, Crunch, Aqua Jet, and other attacks are flavored in the Pokédex as tools these predators use outside of battle as well as in it. You're not just commanding arbitrary animations, you're triggering the same instincts they would use to catch prey in the wild. Humans aren't exempt from this network of eating and being eaten, either as predators or as potential prey. Several Pokédex entries talk about Pokémon attacking people who wander into their territory, especially in mountains, deserts, or deep forests. Aggressive species like Tyranitar, Haxorus, and Gyarados are depicted as capable of leveling landscapes or destroying structures, which implies that any human caught in their path is in serious danger. At the same time, the games make it clear that humans eat Pokémon. In early titles, Slowpoke tails are mentioned as a delicacy being sold by poachers, which becomes a plot point when those tails are harvested illegally. Later entries soften this by explaining that slowpoke tails can fall off and regrow, but that doesn't negate the disturbing fact that someone decided to turn a living creature's body part into a profitable snack. Farfetch'd is another explicit example. Its lore says it carries a leek that's used in cooking, and implies that people hunted it to near extinction because its meat is delicious. The joke hides a serious implication. In this world, certain species have their numbers drastically reduced, not by natural predators, but by human demand for specific flavors. That detail also quietly tells you that official organizations like the Pokémon League and regional governments either allowed or failed to stop this overhunting. Farfetch'd isn't presented as an illegal trade like slowpoke tails. It's simply a bird that got eaten too often. Conservation seems to lag behind appetite, even in a world where many people claim to love Pokémon. There are smaller examples tucked into food-related items and dialogue. Some NPCs talk about cooking Magikarp or other fish Pokémon, while restaurants mention using specific species as ingredients. The battle buffet in cafes in later games often refer to dishes named after or explicitly made from Pokémon that players can also catch. Game Freak usually keeps these references light and comedic, but the underlying idea is consistent. Pokémon are not just battle partners or friends. They are raw resources in a culinary economy. If a species is tasty enough, its relationship with humans shifts from companion to livestock, even without that word ever being used. Cramorant might be one of the most visually direct portrayals of a predator in action. Its ability and signature move cause it to dive into water, swallow a prey, Pokémon like Arrokuda, or even, comically, a Pikachu, then use that captive as a living projectile. The animation plays the scenario for laughs, but the basic idea is that this bird catches things in its throat and then spits them out as weapons. In nature, birds that catch fish or small animals whole don't always succeed in swallowing them. The games turn that moment of struggle into a gimmick, where the prey becomes a tool rather than a meal. That still means, canonically, that Cramorant spends a lot of time flying around with terrified creatures stuck in its beak. Maya illustrates a different angle: deception-based predation. Its Pokédex entries repeatedly describe it as luring enemies in with its seemingly docile face, then attacking with the massive jaws on the back of its head. Those jaws are said to be strong enough to crush iron, which means anything that gets too close is unlikely to escape. What makes Mawile unsettling is the contrast between front and back. From one angle, it looks like a small, almost shy creature. From another, it's a set of blades and teeth ready to clamp down. Predators that use charm or camouflage to bring prey within range feel psychologically darker than ones that chase openly. Some insect Pokémon operate on a similar principle. Aridos has entries mentioning it spinning complex webs and trapping prey overnight, then walking across slender threads to reach its victims. Galvantula sets electrified webs around its territory, stunning anything that touches them before moving in. These sequences are described with the same tone as a behavior note in an animal documentary. There's no moral judgment. The Pokédex isn't against the predator or for the prey. It simply states that this is how the species survives, even if that survival means a lot of other creatures don't make it. The prey side of the equation is equally clearly defined. Species like Caterpie, Wurmple, and Scatterbug are described as easy targets for larger Pokémon, relying on camouflage or mild toxins to avoid being eaten. Their entire evolutionary arc, becoming a cocoon and then a flying adult, can be read as a desperate race to reach a form less likely to be picked off. Even then, their final forms aren't safe. Butterfree and Beautifly have their own predators. Pidgeot and other birds still hunt them if given a chance. The bright colors that make them visually appealing to players might just make them more noticeable in the wild. When you realize how many entries revolve around who eats whom, regular battles start to look like ritualized versions of those same interactions. Moves like Bite, Crunch, and Poison Fang have flavor text that echoes hunting behavior, turning each attack into a miniature story of how that Pokémon survives day to day. The difference is that in a battle, fainting replaces being torn apart, but the instincts behind the animations are the same ones the Pokédex describes. In-universe, trainers are encouraged to think about type matchups and movesets, not food chains. Yet the professors who give out Pokédexes are effectively handing children a book full of notes about who gets eaten in which biome. Every data entry about sharp claws, powerful jaws, or luring scents is another reminder that this world runs on the same biological rules as ours, just written in brighter colors. What makes it disturbing isn't that predation exists, it's that the series largely hides it behind mechanics. You never see a Mandibuzz ripping into a Cubone on screen. Instead, you read about bones, nests, and feeding habits in a cheerful menu, while the overworld shows nothing but circling sprites and rustling grass. The gap between what you see and what you're told becomes its own kind of quiet horror. Once you've read that Marini leaves broken Corsola branches scattered in its wake, every coral reef root feels a little different. After you know that Farfetch'd was nearly wiped out because people like the taste, anytime you see one in the wild, it feels like an encounter with a survivor rather than a random spawn. The Pokédex doesn't editorialize. It never calls any of this cruel or tragic. It just records who eats what, who got hunted too much, and which species learned to adapt by growing sharper teeth or sneakier lures. You're left to make your own judgment about how comfortable you are living, even virtually, in a world where almost everything adorable is also someone's planned meal. Once you start paying attention to how the Pokédex describes psychic powers, you realize that raw damage is the least interesting thing they do. A lot of psychic types aren't just bending spoons or throwing rocks with their minds, they're rewriting what people and Pokémon think, remember, and choose. In a world where these abilities are real and measurable, free will becomes another resource that can be manipulated, like HP or PP. Hypno is the clearest early example of this, and the games never really hide it. Its entries talk about putting people to sleep and leading them away, specifically mentioning children who follow it and don't always come back. Instead of treating that as a rumor, the Pokédex writes it down as if someone observed this behavior often enough to take notes. Drowsy. Its pre-evolution already sets the stage for that kind of intrusion. It's based on the tapir-like creature from old folklore that eats dreams, and the Pokédex describes it as feeding on the dreams of people and Pokémon. Occasionally, it's said to prefer certain flavors of dreams, like those of children, giving it a strange sort of connoisseur profile. Hypno takes that to a more active, predatory level. Instead of waiting for dreams to come to it, it uses its pendulum to send targets into a trance, then guides them away from safety. The image is not of a mischievous prankster, but of a being that can override basic survival instincts with a few swings of its hand. The anime adapts this concept in a way that makes it more visible, without making it less unsettling. In the episode often remembered as Hypno's nap time, a city's Hypno is used to help people sleep, only for its powers to spread and affect children, who begin wandering away and acting like Pokémon. The show frames it as an accident, but the core idea is the same, a psychic field so strong it can rewrite behavior across an entire population. Moments like that say something about the trust that people place in psychic types. Hypno is allowed into a medical context used to treat insomnia, despite the well-known stories about it walking away with kids. It implies that in-universe, society is willing to risk broad, poorly understood mental influence in return for practical benefits. The games match this tone by treating Hypno as a standard encounter and battle partner. It can be caught, trained, and used by regular trainers, and no gym or league official ever raises a concern about what it might do to opponents outside of a match. There is no special license needed to own a Pokémon that, canonically, can hypnotize human children and lead them out into the night. Hypnosis as a move is not exclusive to Hypno, of course. Plenty of other Pokémon can learn it, some as a standard technique, some through breeding or TMs. Mechanically, it's just a status condition. Thematically, it represents the ability to shut off someone's consciousness on command. If you follow the lore seriously, every use of hypnosis in battle is more than a tactical choice. It's a moment where a trainer instructs a creature to switch off another mind's awareness, however briefly. The fact that this is normalized as part of competitive play says a lot about what people in that world have decided is acceptable. Malamar takes the idea of psychic influence and pushes it into actual brainwashing. Its Pokédex entries describe it as having the most powerful hypnotic powers of any Pokémon, capable of twisting the minds of its targets. Rather than simply putting something to sleep, it can make others act according to its will. The anime leans heavily into this aspect. A recurring Malamar appears as an antagonist, using its abilities to control humans and other Pokémon, including officers and authority figures. Scenes of entire rooms full of glassy-eyed people acting under Malamar's orders give a rare visual representation of what the Pokédex implies. Even its design hints at how it operates. Malamar is based on an upside-down squid, with glowing patterns on its body that look like they're meant to mesmerize. The flowing, waving appendages and the intense gaze create the impression of a creature constantly broadcasting suggestions to anyone nearby. The games connect Malamar to human institutions indirectly. In some storylines, villain teams use powerful psychic types to bolster their plans, and a Pokémon capable of global-scale hypnotic influence fits right into that arsenal. If you accept that Malamar's mental control is as strong as advertised, it becomes one of the most dangerous tools a human organization could possibly acquire. Psychic moves like Topsy-Turvy and the idea of reversing the opponent's strengths also fit the theme of turning someone's own mind and power against them. Even without explicit text calling it brainwashing, the flavor of Malamar's kit is that it doesn't just overpower enemies, it sabotages their sense of control. It is not content with winning, it wants to rewrite how its opponents function. In a more subtle way, the orbital line shows how psychic abilities blur into surveillance and manipulation. Orbital's Pokédex entries emphasize the size and power of its brain, stating that it can control the minds of others and monitor what's happening over a wide area. It isn't just a smart bug, it's a mobile, autonomous observation platform with influence extending far beyond its physical reach. Earlier forms like Blipbug and Dottler are presented as data gatherers, absorbing information and developing psychic potential even before evolution. By the time you reach Orbital, the line has gone from a simple insect to something that can oversee an entire field of activity, possibly influencing multiple targets at once. The image is less cute ladybug and more telepathic drone. The notion that a single Pokémon can sense and affect the behavior of everything within range has disturbing implications for privacy. In-universe, a trainer with a well-trained Orbital could effectively spy on entire towns without ever being noticed. The Pokédex doesn't state that anyone does this, but it also doesn't suggest any regulation or safeguards. Orbital's design, shaped like a UFO, reinforces the idea that it functions like a hovering alien mind. Its domed body and luminous details make it look more like a piece of advanced technology than a simple organism. The series never directly calls it a surveillance device, but the combination of shape, abilities, and lore reads very much like one. Aegislash is a different sort of mental threat, one that combines possession with slow, quiet manipulation. Its entries describe it as being able to sense the leadership potential or ambition within people, and choosing to serve those future kings and rulers. The twist is that it eventually drains the life energy of those it serves, reducing them to husks. That dynamic reads like a cautionary tale about power. Anyone desperate enough to accept Aegislash's help gains influence, protection, and a symbol of authority, but at the invisible cost of their own vitality. The sword doesn't just serve, it consumes, feeding on the very person it elevates. The lore explicitly links Aegislash to royal families and lineages. In some entries, it is said that generations of kings have wielded it, only to have their life force sucked away over time. Entire dynasties might have been shaped and shortened by a single cursed weapon choosing its wielders. Unlike many ghost types, Aegislash doesn't simply haunt a location or scare passers-by. It actively seeks out people with ambition, aligning itself with those who are likely to rise to positions of power. In other words, it optimizes its own access to authority by latching on to the most influential minds it can find. The imagery around Aegislash compounds this. In shield form, it stands like a defensive guardian. In blade form, it attacks with deadly force, implying that it can both protect and kill on its chosen wielder's behalf. All the while, even when acting as a shield, it's quietly siphoning away the life of the hand that holds it. This is a more subtle form of control than Malamar's raw brainwashing. Rather than forcibly changing someone's behavior, Aegislash encourages them to lean into their own ambition, knowing that their striving for power will keep it close. The psychic element isn't about overt mind control. It's about sensing, selecting, and then draining the people whose decisions shape history. Psychic influence in the Pokémon world often sits on that spectrum between direct control and quiet steering. On one end, you have moves like Hypnosis and Pokémon like Malamar, pulling the strings of victims who are effectively puppets. On the other, you have beings like Aegislash, whose impact on minds comes from choosing who to serve and when to remain at their side. There are other psychic types that fill in the middle ground. Alakazam, for example, is known for its massive IQ and the spoons it bends, but its entries also talk about its ability to remember everything since birth and predict movements. In a battle or negotiation, that kind of perfect recall and foresight is a form of psychological dominance, even without explicit mind control. Beheim is another case where the line between psychic power and mental interference gets blurry. Its lore mentions that it can manipulate memories, changing what people recall about events. If taken literally, that means a Behebi encounter could erase or replace key moments in someone's life without any external trace. Those kinds of abilities suggest a world where the past is not as stable as people think. If memories can be edited by psychic types, then eyewitness accounts, personal histories, and even a trainer's sense of self are vulnerable. The games don't explore this in detail, but the Pokédex makes it clear that the tools exist. Moves like Confuse Ray, Swagger, and Attract seem harmless in comparison, but they illustrate the same basic principle. They don't cause physical damage, they cause misfires in decision-making, making targets hurt themselves, become overconfident, or act irrationally. Underneath the mechanics, they represent deliberate interference with someone's judgment. The existence of human psychics in the games and anime complicates the picture even further. NPCs who can sense thoughts, communicate telepathically, or move objects with their minds are treated as unusual but not terrifying. They often form bonds with psychic-type Pokémon, creating linked networks of beings who can observe and influence the world in ways ordinary people can't. Villain teams take advantage of this, whether explicitly or implicitly. From Team Rocket to more modern organizations, recruiting or capturing powerful psychic types is a recurring tactic. The ability to control minds, erase memories, or foresee resistance makes it much easier for them to operate in secret. Yet for all of this, the official narrative rarely shows any large-scale societal response. There is no mention of laws restricting the use of Hypno in childcare settings, or bans on using Malamar in certain professions. Orbeetle's surveillance range isn't met with countermeasures or psychic shielding, it's simply listed as a trait. Trainers are encouraged to treat these abilities as tools, no different from a fire-type's flames or an electric-type's shocks. The moral weight of telling a creature to knock someone unconscious, twist their mind, or quietly drain their life is not addressed. For most characters, it's just another part of strategy, another function printed on the move summary screen. From a gameplay perspective, that abstraction is necessary. Turning every Hypnosis into an ethical debate would paralyze battles and slow the story to a crawl. But from a lore perspective, the fact that so many forms of mental interference exist and are normalized makes the setting feel quietly unnerving. The most disturbing part may be that, just like with predation, the Pokédex delivers all of this as neutral data. Hypno taking children, Malamar rewriting minds, Aegislash draining kings, or Battle overseeing entire areas, none of it is labeled as evil by the game itself. It is simply behavior, recorded in the same tone used to describe where a Pokémon lives or what it eats. When you string these entries together, the picture that emerges is of a world where consciousness is fragile. Dreams can be stolen, decisions can be bent, memories can be altered, and even your ambition can be turned against you by the weapons you wield. And in almost every case, those abilities are held not just by wild creatures, but by partners standing beside trainers, ready to act as soon as they hear a command. The Pokédex doesn't only tell stories about ghosts and predators. Sometimes it quietly claims that people themselves become Pokémon. Not symbolically, not as a myth told by an old NPC, but as a straightforward species description. Once you start lining those entries up, the distinction between human and Pokémon begins to look worryingly thin. One of the bluntest examples sits in the first generation's Psychic-type roster. Certain entries for Kadabra state that one day, a boy with strong psychic powers woke up in bed and had become a Kadabra. There's no ritual, no accident in a lab. Just the idea that human adolescence and psychic mutation can end with you classified as a different life form. The wording is clinical. It doesn't say the boy felt like a Kadabra or was possessed by one. It says he became it. In a world where this is accepted as Pokédex fact, anyone with emerging psychic talent knows their identity might literally drift across species lines. That raises questions the games never address. If the boy's family is still alive, do they know that the Pokémon in the nearby tall grass might be their relative? Would a human-turned Pokémon still be recognized legally as a person, or are they now just another entry in a professor's database? Yamask pushes that idea even further, but from the opposite direction: human first, ghost later. As already described, its Unova entries explain that each one used to be human and carries a mask shaped like its former face, weeping when it remembers its life. Everything about that description assumes a before and after, a person with relationships, routines, memories, and then a floating spirit slotted into a species chart. Galarian Yamask adds a more explicitly cursed angle. Instead of a stylized mask, it drags a stone tablet fragment engraved with runes, and newer entries describe it as being bound to that relic by a powerful curse. The stone's markings react when the Pokémon takes damage, suggesting that the pain of the curse is actively part of how this form exists. The evolution into Runerigus deepens the unease. Runerigus is described as a painting or engraving that has come alive, animated by a malevolent force. Touching its body supposedly shows you horrifying visions of the past, implying that whatever curse fuels it carries the memories of some ancient tragedy or crime. In this line, a human spirit, a cursed object, and a physical form all blur into one. The Yamask that used to be a person fuses with the remnants of an old artwork and emerges as a walking, distorted monument. Nothing in the Pokédex suggests the original human's will survives that transformation. Instead, the curse and the object appear to take over. Galarian Corsola isn't a human, but it represents another way a living being can become a ghost through environmental catastrophe instead of folklore. Regular Corsola is a bright coral-like Pokémon often associated with reefs and warm seas. The Galarian form, by contrast, is pure ghost type, described as a coral that died and came back as a spirit because its habitat was destroyed. That description carries more weight than most Pokédex flavor. It links the existence of a ghost type directly to mass death caused by outside forces, in this case implied to be environmental damage. Instead of a single tragic soul, you're looking at an entire species pushed into ghosthood by something larger than itself. Corsola, its evolution looks like a shattered, hollowed-out shell surrounded by a ghostly aura. According to the Pokédex, the spirit energy that once inhabited the coral body has become so strong that it spills outward, leaving the physical core brittle and empty. The fragments of its former form drift like debris around the spectral mass. This is a different flavor of horror than a haunted house or a vengeful spirit. The haunting isn't tethered to a person or a building. It's attached to ecological collapse. An entire environment dies, and what rises from it is fragile, bitter, and unable to fully contain its own spiritual pressure. Other ghost types connect directly to human artifacts and possessions. Bennett, for instance, is described as a plush doll that was thrown away and came to life, fueled by a powerful grudge against the child who discarded it. Its zipper mouth and prickly silhouette turn a simple toy into a walking reminder that neglect and rejection can have consequences even in the world of objects. The grudge theme continues with Shuppet, a spirit that is attracted to resentment and envy, clustering around homes where negative emotions are strong. Shuppet itself isn't explicitly a former person, but it feeds on feelings people would rather pretend they don't have. It's as if the emotional fallout from human relationships generates its own wildlife. Honage goes one step further, blending the idea of spirits, artifacts, and active danger. According to its Pokédex entries, Honnej is born when a departed spirit possesses an ancient sword. If someone grabs its hilt, the cloth-like arm wraps around their arm and drains their life energy, sometimes entirely. That single behavior turns a discarded weapon into a hidden predator. A traveler or historian who finds a beautiful old blade could, in universe, die simply from curiosity. The Pokédex doesn't treat that as a rumor. It states it as a consistent trait, implying that enough people have made that mistake for it to be well known. Doublade, its evolution, doubles the threat rather than changing its nature. 2 swords means 2 chances to latch onto a victim, 2 cloth arms to wrap around someone's body. In battle, this becomes a visual flourish. In the lore, it suggests that whatever spirit animates these weapons has learned that more blades means more opportunities to feed. Aegislash, already examined from the angle of draining kings, fits into this cursed object category too. It's not just a sword and shield, it's a lineage of armaments that has spent centuries attached to human rulers, quietly influencing history from their hands. When you think of it alongside Honjij and Doublade, the line reads like a catalog of things that look like tools but are actually predators. That theme shows up again in more mundane objects as well. Chandelure, for instance, uses a chandelier as the base for a soul-burning ghost, merging household decor with supernatural menace. Even though its origin doesn't involve a specific named person, the idea that a light fixture can become the thing that consumes your spirit is very much in line with these cursed, everyday items. Sinista and Poltergeist bring modern tableware into the same tradition. Their Pokédex entries describe them as spirits inhabiting leftover tea, using chipped or antique cups as bodies. Trainers who drink from them, especially without realizing what they are said to experience fainting spells or other strange effects. The detail that there is an authentic and a phony form, depending on whether the cup is a genuine antique or a mass-produced imitation, adds another layer. Authentic Sinistea inhabits rare, valuable tierware, making these spirits more like prized, haunted antiques than simple ghosts. Owning one means casually placing your hands on an object that houses both a spirit and a fragile, irreplaceable vessel. Pumpkaboo and Gourgeist stay closer to folklore, but still deal with the idea of spirits needing a body. Pumpkaboo is described as a wandering spirit that took up residence in a pumpkin, using the gourd as a portable body. Different sizes correspond to different kinds of souls, suggesting a taxonomy of restless dead based on how much spiritual weight they carry. Gourgeist amplifies the eerie tone with behavior instead of origin. Some entries say it sings joyfully while wandering the streets on dark nights, guiding people with its song. Those who follow the sound are never seen again, implying that the cheerful performance is just bait for the next lost soul. In all of these cases, the boundary between object and being is thin. A doll becomes Banette, a sword becomes Honij, a teacup becomes Sinistea, a pumpkin body becomes Pumpkaboo. The moment something is abandoned, broken, or left behind, there's a chance that a spirit will move in and turn it into a body. Sometimes the spirit is clearly human. Sometimes it's just described as a wandering soul. The games rarely spell out whose soul it was, or why it chose that particular host. That vagueness makes everyday items in the Pokémon world feel slightly haunted, even when no ghost type shows up on screen. There are also Pokémon whose bodies are explicitly described as shells or vessels for something else, echoing Shedinja's hollow husk. Golett and Golurk, for example, are said to be clay golems animated by mysterious energy, with unknown creators. Their bodies are ancient constructs, but the force that moves them could be spirits, life energy, or something even more abstract. If their creators were human, that would mean people in the distant past learned to bind souls or energies into artificial forms, then vanished while their creations kept walking. Galurk's job of guarding ruins or ancient sites in some entries supports that image. It's a body on autopilot, following instructions long after its original masters are gone. Mimikyu is a different kind of cursed form, one driven by loneliness and fear rather than revenge. The cloth costume it wears is modeled after Pikachu, because the spirit underneath believes that looking like a popular Pokémon will let it make friends. Pokédex descriptions warn that seeing its true form can drive people into shock or cause mysterious illnesses. That warning functions almost like a curse in reverse. The danger isn't that Mimikyu wants to hurt anyone. It's that its existence is so unsettling that exposure to it harms others. To protect itself and those around it, it hides under a disguise, creating a body out of fabric in the hope that someone will love the fake version. Taken as a group, these Pokémon show a world where identity and form are constantly in flux. Humans may become Kadabra or Yamask, dolls may awaken as Bennett, cursed murals may stride around as Runerigus, abandoned teacups may host Synestia. At every scale, from individual toys to royal regalia, the things people leave behind can literally come back into their lives. For children growing up in this universe, those stories aren't just scary tales. They're part of how adults explain why you shouldn't throw toys away carelessly, tamper with old weapons, or drink from strange cups in haunted houses. Folklore hooks into actual Pokédex data, blurring the line between parents' warnings and confirmed research. The disturbing part is that, officially, none of this is treated as an anomaly. Professors catalog Bennett and Honage right alongside Pidgey and Rattata, as if human grief-fueled doll and possession sword that kills wielders are just ordinary wildlife entries. A trainer scrolling through their Pokédex sees ecological data, move lists, and in the same breath, accounts of curses that cost people their bodies. There's no sign of a global policy about how to handle objects likely to become vessels for spirits. Abandoned cities and old mansions are full of potential hosts, yet they're left open for curious travelers and young trainers to explore. Haunted artifacts are just another kind of collectible, another thing a Pokéball can compress into data. Underneath the bright designs and Halloween-themed events, the lore paints a world where death and emotion seep into the material around them. Regret, abandonment, ambition, and environmental ruin all leave residues that can wake up and walk. And the next time a trainer admires a rare old sword, a cute plush, or a chipped cup of tea, the Pokédex quietly suggests they might be standing face to face with someone, or something, that didn't stay dead. Most Pokédex entries feel like snapshots of individual species, but every so often the games pull the camera back and mention something much larger. Buried in museum plaques, NPC dialogue, and post-game cutscenes are references to wars, apocalypses, and timelines where civilization has already lost. The unsettling part is how casually those events are treated, as if global catastrophe is just another piece of background lore for a world meant to be safe for 10-year-olds. Kalos is the clearest case where an entire region's history is shaped by one war. 3,000 years before the events of X and Y, an ancient conflict broke out that dragged countless people and Pokémon into fighting. What starts as a myth told in an old town gradually unfolds into a story about mass death and a weapon built from grief. IS sits at the center of that history. He's introduced as a towering, tired man who seems out of place among the cheerful trainers in bright cities. Only later do you learn that he is effectively immortal, wandering the world as someone who once used the bond with his partner Pokémon to power something that should never have been built. The ultimate weapon he constructed was designed to end the war. To charge it, he harnessed the life energy of many Pokémon, concentrating their sacrifice into a beam that could wipe out entire armies. In doing so, he saved his kingdom, but unleashed something so destructive that the land itself still remembers it as a scar. AZ's own partner, Floette, became the symbol of that horror. After dying in the war, it was revived by the weapon's energy, returning to its trainer changed and carrying a unique, glowing flower not seen anywhere else. The revival didn't come with forgiveness. Flocket turned away from the man who had used countless other lives to bring back just one. Images of the weapon buried underground, wrapped in roots and stone, drive home how much the world wanted to forget. Rather than dismantle it, people entombed the machine, hoping time and earth would hold it in place. Centuries passed, kingdoms fell, and the device still sat there, intact enough that someone like Lysandra could try to fire it again. When Lysandra finally attempts to reactivate the weapon, the games let you see exactly how easily history could repeat itself. Energy builds, a vast flower-like structure rises from the ground, and beams of destructive power shoot into the sky. For a moment, modern Kalos is seconds away from being turned into another crater, another footnote in a long list of ruined civilizations. The most chilling detail is that none of this is treated as myth or legend. Historical text in the game describes the war and the weapon as documented events, not fairy tales. You're not uncovering a ghost story. You're learning about a verified case where human grief and ambition almost erased an entire region. Town structures and monuments keep that memory alive in subtle ways. The mysterious monoliths of Geosenge Town, the elaborate stones jutting from the ground, turn out to be physical remnants of the weapon's housing. Residents live beside them, build homes around them, and rarely question that their village grew up around a dormant engine of annihilation. That normalization is disturbing on its own. People hang laundry near the same cliffs that once split open to reveal beams of catastrophic light. Children use roads that trace over ground scarred by an ancient beam, fired by a man who couldn't accept the death of his partner. The war itself is never shown, but its casualties echo through the tone of the region. Countless Pokémon died as fuel. Whole armies were wiped off the map, and one man's attempt to end violence merely buried it under stone. Kalos appears peaceful, yet its foundational trauma is a moment when the line between trainer and weapon engineer blurred completely. Galar has its own near-apocalypse, remembered as the darkest day. Unlike Kalos's war, this event is framed more like a natural disaster, though the cause is anything but natural. Red storms of energy rained from the sky. Pokémon across the region went berserk and gigantified, and civilization came close to losing control of its own ecology. Eternatus sits at the core of that story. This dragon-like skeletal entity fell to Galar in the distant past, bringing with it a form of energy that triggers Dynamax and Gigantamax phenomena. When that power runs wild, it doesn't just make Pokémon big, it destabilizes them, turning them into engines of destruction that can't tell friend from foe. According to legend, two heroes, later associated with Zayan and Zamazenta, stood against the chaos. Wielding a sword and a shield steeped in mysterious energy, they managed to subdue the catastrophe and force the foreign creature into dormancy. The event was later simplified into the storybook-like murals and myths you see in places like Stow-on-Side and Hammerlock. Modern Galar built an entire energy infrastructure on the remnants of that disaster. Macrocosmos and Chairman Rose discovered how to refine the particles associated with Eternatus into power plants and technology. Cities are lit, trains run, and stadiums glow thanks to the same force that nearly tore the region apart once already. That reliance comes with a ticking clock. Rose learns that the energy supply will fail in the distant future, and rather than trust future generations to address it, he decides to act immediately. His plan involves awakening Eternatus again, deliberately triggering another darkest day under the belief that short-term chaos will prevent long-term crisis. When the Red Storm returns, you see stadiums, symbols of pride and sportsmanship, become epicenters of disaster. Pokémon Gigantamax out of control, looming over cities that were never meant to withstand such power. Spectators and bystanders vanish off-screen, but the implication is clear. Any one of those arenas could become ground zero for mass casualties. The region's response is steeped in denial. Most citizens believe the darkest day is a distant legend, something turned into murals and bedtime stories. Very few understand that their entire energy grid is built on the same unstable foundation, and that awakening Eternatus again is not a hypothetical risk but an active project. Trainers, once again, are put in the position of solving what adults broke. Child protagonists are the ones who climb the towers, confront Chairman Rose, and battle Eternatus at the top of Hammerlock's spire. Meanwhile, the figure who triggered the crisis sees himself as a savior, convinced that only decisive action justifies the collateral damage. Comparing Kalos and Galar reveals a pattern in how the series treats region-wide catastrophe. Kalos's weapon represents deliberate, focused destruction born from grief and vengeance. Galar's darkest day reflects a different failure. Leaders so convinced of their own solutions that they risk repeating the worst moment in their history. Both events share one common factor: people underestimating the cost of wielding immense power. Ace thought he could end a war by unleashing a weapon powered by sacrificed Pokémon. Rose believed he could secure Galar's future by waking a cosmic dragon, whose energy once nearly erased his region. Outside of those headline events, the games hint at other conflicts that shaped the world. Early dialogue from characters like Lot Surge and Kanto casually mentions a war, with lines about electric Pokémon saving his life on the battlefield. The specifics are never elaborated on, leaving players with the knowledge that human warfare, not just Pokémon battles, exists within this universe. Regions like Unova are built around the idea of ideological conflict. While Black and White never show an outright war, the plot centers on Team Plasma's attempt to redefine the relationship between humans and Pokémon. When the climax involves a castle bursting from the ground and a legendary dragon appearing, it feels less like a simple villain team attack and more like a political movement, threatening to destabilize an entire nation. Even Hoenn carries echoes of near disaster that blur the line between natural and human-made crises. The ancient meteor that nearly destroyed the region and the Draconid lore around Rayquaza describe a world that has survived at least one near-extinction event before. Later, modern scientists tinker with mega-evolution energy and attempt rocket-based solutions, running dangerously close to repeating the mistakes of their ancestors. Those stories frame the world as one that has repeatedly skirted extinction. Catastrophes aren't just one-off legends. They're part of a cycle of mistakes, rediscoveries, and half-understood technologies. When a professor hands you a Pokédex and sends you out into the world, they're sending you into a landscape shaped by decisions that almost erased it. Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon push that idea further by letting you step into a timeline where civilization has already lost. Through Ultra Wormholes, you can visit the Ultra Ruin, a nightmarish version of Hawali City swallowed by darkness and decay. The sky is black, buildings lie in ruins, and almost nothing moves except for the creature responsible, Guzzlord. Guzzlord is an Ultra Beast, categorized and studied like a Pokémon, but treated as an invasive species from another dimension. Its Pokédex entries describe it as endlessly consuming, devouring mountains and even factories without leaving anything behind. In Ultra Ruin, that description stops being abstract. The environment around you is visual proof of what it means for such a being to be left unchecked. The city's remnants are full of small human touches. Traffic lights hang at odd angles, roads are cracked, and signage from a once busy town still stands, illuminated by a sickly glow. You're not walking through an alien planet. You're walking through a familiar location that simply didn't survive. NPC dialogue makes it clear that this isn't some random alternate reality used for flavor. In that timeline, people tried to fight back, but Guzzlord's hunger simply outpaced their ability to resist. A few survivors can be found wandering the ruins, resigned to watching the last pieces of their world disappear into the creature's endless maw. Unlike other legendary-driven disasters, Ultra Ruin doesn't give you a grand narrative about heroes and resolutions. No pair of legendary wolves arrives to seal the threat, and there's no immortal king to regret his choices. Instead, you find a world quietly being eaten, long past the point where dramatic speeches or final battles could save it. The contrast with your own Alola is stark. In your timeline, Ultra Beasts appear, but specialized teams and legendary Pokémon help you push them back. Traveling to Ultra Ruin is like seeing a what-if scenario. What happens if the heroes fail? If the protocols are too slow? If the first response isn't enough? That glimpse raises uncomfortable questions. If one city can fall that completely, what about entire regions? The series deliberately doesn't answer that, leaving players to imagine how many other timelines or dimensions might have similar ruins, each with its own Guzzlord or equivalent catastrophe. Even outside of Ultra Ruin, environmental collapse is a recurring warning sign. Galarian Corsola's existence is built on the idea that entire coral reefs died and left ghosts in their place. Other Pokédex entries mention dwindling habitats, polluted seas, and Pokémon forced into new forms because the old world no longer supports them. Legends. Arceus reframes familiar locations like Sinnoh as ancient Hisui, a time when people were still learning how to live alongside Pokémon instead of fearing them. The land is wild, and the region's future stability depends on whether humans can form a workable relationship with the powerful creatures around them. While it's technically a prelude, the tone suggests that the line between harmonious coexistence and constant disaster was thinner than modern trainers realize. Subtle references to old wars and ancient kings show up in museums and libraries across multiple games. Relics, stone tablets, and rusted weapons hint at conflicts that predate all the modern regions we know. Every new excavation or ruin could easily be another geosenge, another site sitting on top of technology that should never have been built. What ties all these stories together is a repeated combination of arrogance and short-sightedness. Time and again, people in this world tap into forces they don't fully understand. Life energy, Dynamax power, ultra wormholes, and assume they can control them. When things go wrong, it's usually children and teenagers who are sent in to pick up the pieces. The regions themselves carry the scars, even if most NPCs don't talk about them directly. Kalos has a flower-shaped crater housing a buried weapon. Galar's mythology revolves around a storm so terrible that people turned it into a storybook monster, and Alola contains a direct portal to a city that simply did not make it. From a distance, the world of Pokémon looks stable. Gyms run on schedule, tournaments are held, festivals take place in clean, well-lit streets. Look closer, and you see a planet that has repeatedly survived by the narrowest of margins. Weapons fueled by souls, dragons falling from the sky, gluttonous beasts devouring entire cities, each one nearly turned the colorful map into a collection of lifeless ruins. The most disturbing detail is that almost no one in these regions seems to think they're living in a post-crisis world. Children leave home with a smile and a Pokédex, unaware that the mountain they're climbing once almost became a crater, or that an entire parallel version of their town already lies in tatters. Life goes on, gyms reopen, and the disasters are filed away as myths, even when their remnants stand in plain sight. For players, those stories live in the margins. A cutscene here, a plaque there, an optional location accessed through a rare portal. Taken together, though, they form a different picture of the Pokémon world, one where extinction-level events are part of the setting's fabric, not just isolated legends. Every time a professor says the world is full of mysteries waiting to be discovered, the subtext is that some of those mysteries are the ruins of civilizations that thought they were safe, right up until the moment they weren't. Some Pokémon are born in caves, forests, and oceans. Others are born in labs, engineered piece by piece with very specific purposes in mind. The series is surprisingly open about the fact that scientists and organizations have tried to build living weapons, and that those creations don't always stay under control. Tomically, Mewtwo is the clearest, most iconic example. In multiple games and official materials, it's described as a Pokémon created by human scientists who manipulated Mew's genetic code. The intention wasn't conservation or medical research. They wanted the most powerful Pokémon imaginable. Cinnabar Island's mansion in the original Kanto games hides that story in its crumbling journals. Scattered logs talk about discovering a new Pokémon, Mew, then about a Mewtwo that became far stronger than expected. By the time you explore the building, the lab is abandoned, overrun by wild Pokémon, with only burnt notes and broken machines left behind. Those documents portray a project that escalated too quickly. Researchers started with the DNA of a rare mythical Pokémon, then pushed it past its natural limits. The result gained incredible psychic power and a will strong enough to break free and destroy the facility that made it. In the anime's first movie, that same basic idea is expanded into a full character arc. Mewtwo awakens in a tank, fully aware but treated as a specimen, not a person. A combination of existential confusion and harsh treatment pushes it from shock to anger, culminating in the destruction of the lab above the sea. That reaction isn't framed as a random outburst. The story emphasizes that Mewtwo understands it was created as a tool, repeatedly referred to as a weapon or project, rather than a partner. When it rejects that role, it does so completely, deciding that if humans see it as an experiment, it owes them nothing in return. Design-wise, everything about Mewtwo supports the idea of engineered power. The muscular humanoid build, the tube-like structure connecting the back of its head to its spine, and the expressionless face all read more like a laboratory product than a wild animal. It looks like a creature built around one goal: amplify psychic ability as far as it will go. Even its in-game stats and movesets underline that identity. High special attack, powerful psychic moves, access to a wide variety of coverage options. Everything screams endgame boss. Finding Mewtwo in a secluded cave after defeating the League feels less like meeting a legendary guardian, and more like uncovering a weapon that was buried and forgotten. The unsettling part is that the scientists who made it existed within the same world as professors like Oak and Elm. One side hands out starter Pokémon and safety advice to kids, the other spliced DNA from a mythical creature until something unstoppable appeared. The games never show any trial, inquiry, or public debate about that project. The lab simply went silent, and the survivors moved on. Mewtwo may be the most famous lab-made Pokémon, but it isn't the only one. The Porygon line is openly described as artificial, a Pokémon created entirely from computer code and turned into a living digital life form. Instead of evolving through natural growth, Porygon changes with software upgrades and special items, echoing firmware patches more than biology. Originally, Porygon was designed for space exploration and cyberspace travel. Its ability to convert itself into data and move through computer systems made it a perfect test subject for environments humans couldn't safely enter. Porygon 2 and Porygon Z then represent iterations on that concept, improved AI, then unstable tweaks that made it act strangely. Porygon Z's lore is especially uneasy. It's said that the programs used to upgrade it were not properly verified, leading to bugs in its behavior. Instead of becoming a more efficient explorer, it starts acting odd, as if the patch changed not just its capabilities, but its mind. That's a different kind of weaponization. Rather than building something powerful to attack directly, people created a digital organism that can slip into systems, ignore physical boundaries, and act unpredictably if modified. The Pokédex never uses hacking terminology, but the idea of a corrupted cyber Pokémon roaming network devices speaks for itself. Lysandra Labs, the Aether Foundation, and other groups bring a more modern tone to these experiments. They're not just private scientists in isolated mansions, they're corporate or quasi-government entities with large budgets. Their projects involve cloning, genetic restraint systems, and attempts to produce controllable anti-threat weapons. Type Null is the centerpiece of that approach. In Alola's lore, it was created by the Aether Foundation as part of Project Beastkiller, designed specifically to fight Ultra Beasts. Researchers pulled together traits from various powerful Pokémon, then sealed the resulting creature inside heavy armor to keep it from going berserk. The restraint device is central to Type Null's identity. Its Pokédex entries mention that the helmet and restraints are necessary because its power would drive it into a rampage. Mask, bolts, and heavy plating aren't aesthetic choices. They're emergency measures bolted on after the fact. Even its name reads like a file label. Type Null doesn't sound like a species, it sounds like an unfinished project, a placeholder in a database. The number of prototypes was small, each one treated as an individual test unit rather than member of a natural population. In the story, one of those units is given to Gladion, who names it Silvally once it breaks free of its mask. The evolution isn't triggered by level or stone, but by trust and compatibility with its trainer. When the restraints shatter, Type Null regains its full potential and a true species identity, symbolized by the new name. Silvally's ability to change type with special memory items links it back to its original design purpose. It can adapt to counter any target, shifting its elemental alignment to gain an advantage. For the Aether Foundation, that versatility was supposed to produce a perfect countermeasure against Ultra Beasts. Seeing Silvally at full power is a reminder of what Project Beastkiller really meant. Aether didn't just want to defend people from extra-dimensional creatures, they wanted something they could point and fire at any threat. Locking the prototypes into masks suggests even they knew they were playing with something that might not stop at the enemy they had in mind. Janie Ext, another resurrected, weaponized Pokémon, and its story blends fossil revival with heavy modification. Team Plasma dug up the remains of an ancient insect Pokémon, revived it, and then outfitted it with a cannon on its back. Pokédex entries state that this edition drastically increased its combat power, turning a long-extinct predator into a modern artillery platform. Ancient Genesect hunted long before humans had advanced technology. The revived version is then updated with armor and drive cartridges that let it change the type of its signature move, Technoblast. Just like Silvally, that adaptability was designed, not evolved. The image of a prehistoric hunter fitted with sleek, mechanical gear reflects a particular philosophy. Instead of learning from the past, Team Plasma decided to weaponize it further, stacking technological aggression on top of natural predation. The result is a creature that doesn't belong fully to either era. Within the anime, Genesect's mechanical enhancements set it apart from other revived Pokémon like Aerodactyl or Rampardos. Those fossils rejoin the modern world more or less as they were. Genesect, by contrast, emerges into a world where it has been reshaped into something it never chose to be, with hardware bolted onto its back. Experiments like these raise questions about consent, even in a fictional world. Mewtwo never asked to be created. Type Null didn't ask to be bound in armor, and Genesect certainly didn't request a canon. Yet all of them are treated as Pokémon within the Pokédex, lumped into the same database as creatures that hatched or evolved in the wild. Organizations in the Pokémon world often justify these projects as necessary responses to existential threats. Ultra Beasts, powerful legendaries, and cosmic entities like Eternatus are real dangers. From that vantage point, building living weapons looks less like cruelty and more like survival strategy. The disturbing twist is how often those weapons end up turned inward. Mewtwo destroys its own lab and attacks humans, not just wild Pokémon. Project Beastkiller's creations are used in personal struggles and family conflicts before they ever face an Ultra Beast. Even more traditional legendaries sometimes bear the marks of human interference. The creation trio of Sinnoh, Dialga, Palkia, and Giratina are primarily cosmic entities, but their capture by organizations like Team Galactic involves high-tech devices designed to bind entities that control time and space. Those devices aren't described in detail, yet they implicitly belong in the same category as restraint masks and cannons, tools for forcing power to obey. From a gameplay standpoint, turning legendaries and engineered Pokémon into catchable team members is part of the appeal. Every player knows the thrill of throwing an Ultra Ball at something that once nearly ended a region. Lore-wise, though, that process looks like normalizing the use of X-weapons as companions. None of this is presented as a major ethical crisis in universe. Professors do not caution young trainers about the origins of Silvally or the trauma of a Mewtwo thrown into a Pokéball. Villain teams are condemned for their schemes, but the broader practice of modifying and engineering life rarely draws serious pushback. Some individuals object. Nyonanova, Lucamine's children in Alola, and scattered NPCs who love Pokémon for their own sake all question how far humans should go. Their voices, however, are set against entire institutions that see Pokémon power as something to be refined, controlled, and repurposed. The Pokédex's neutral tone makes these stories feel even colder. Mewtwo's creation, Porygon's artificial origin, Type Null's restraint mask, Genesect's canon, all of it is written down as simple fact. There's no built-in warning label beyond the implications of words like weapon and experiment. Taken together, these engineered and modified Pokémon suggest a world where the line between partner and product is blurry. Some creatures are guardians of oceans, or embodiments of time. Others started life on a blueprint, designed to fight very specific enemies. And when those creations decide they don't want to be tools anymore, the fallout becomes part of the world's scarred history. Mewtwo brooding in a cave, Silvally breaking its mask, Genesect flying through the night with a cannon bolted to its back. Each one is a reminder that in this universe, the most frightening monsters aren't always the ones that appeared naturally. Sometimes they're exactly what people asked for, built to specification, then left to figure out what it means to exist as someone else's idea of a perfect weapon. Most Pokédex horror is about what Pokémon do to others. Every now and then, it quietly turns inward and describes what happens to their own bodies when humans decide stronger is never enough. Mega Evolution, Recoil moves, and impossible physical stats all hint at a world where power often comes from forcing living creatures past the point where their biology should reasonably hold together. Mega evolution is introduced in Kalos like a miraculous new stage of growth. The official explanation is that a strong bond between trainer and Pokémon, combined with a special stone, unlocks hidden potential. When you read the Pokédex entries for specific Megas, that uplifting story starts to sound more like controlled self-harm. Several entries outright say that Mega evolution is painful or stressful. Some Pokémon are described as becoming more violent, unstable, or frenzied after the transformation. Instead of growing wiser or more serene, they turn into exaggerated, overcharged versions of themselves that sometimes seem barely in control. Mega Gyarados is a clear example. Normal Gyarados is already infamous for rampages and rage, evolving from a harmless Magikarp into a dragon-like threat. Its Mega form is described as undergoing such a massive change that its brain structure alters, leaving it in a constant state of fury and resentment. That isn't just a cosmetic upgrade. The lore suggests Mega Gyarados loses the ability to calm down, stewing in anger as long as the form is sustained. For a trainer, activating that Mega evolution means deliberately pushing an already unstable Pokémon into a mindset where it can't relax or think clearly. Mega Glalie reflects physical distortion rather than just emotional changes. Its Pokédex entries describe the jaw as expanding to the point where it can't close its mouth anymore. The design shows a sphere split wide open, teeth exposed in a permanent, frozen scream of a grin. There's a clinical brutality in that description. The transformation gives Glalie increased offensive power, but at the cost of basic anatomical function. Breathing, eating, or even resting comfortably all sound impossible when your skull is locked into a permanently unhinged state. Mega Tyranitar is another case where power comes at the cost of stability. The lore paints it as so overflowing with energy that the ground trembles under its footsteps and mountains can crumble. At the same time, some entries suggest that its body is straining to contain that force, as if the shell of the original Pokémon was never meant to hold this much. Other Megas show more subtle signs of strain. Some become skinnier and sharper, as if burning through their own reserves just to maintain the form. Others bulk up in ways that look difficult to sustain, adding spikes, armor, or muscle at the joints where motion should be easiest. Megas that take already extreme designs and push them further stand out the most. Mega Charizard X's blue flames are said to burn even hotter than its standard fire, enough to melt almost anything. Mega Charizard Y focuses on aerial dominance, with entries suggesting its attacks can incinerate targets from high above, before they ever reach it. On paper, these evolutions are upgrades, but they read like overclocked hardware. The stones act as overclock buttons, temporarily pushing a system far beyond its intended parameters. As long as the battle continues, the Pokémon maintains that state, even if it means enduring physical or mental stress. The fact that Mega Evolution ends after battle underlines that idea. It's not a natural stage like going from Charmander to Charmeleon to Charizard. It's a mode that can be switched on and off. When the fight is over, the body drops back to normal, as if it can't withstand that level of power for more than a short burst. Trainers are encouraged to use this ability as a tactical trump card. Gym leaders and champions activate Mega Stones at dramatic moments, showcasing the spectacle. Rarely does anyone comment on what the Pokémon might be feeling during those transformations, beyond "it's getting serious now." Outside of Mega Evolution, the Pokédex is filled with measurements of extreme conditions that bodies supposedly endure. Magcargo is the most infamous case. Its body temperature is said to be hotter than the surface of the sun. That number is physically impossible in real-world terms, yet it's printed in the official in-game encyclopedia as if it were a routine mineral fact. If taken literally, that would mean any trainer standing next to Magcargo should be vaporized instantly. Pokeballs, arenas, even entire towns would be annihilated by proximity. The games obviously don't depict that, but the text remains, a reminder that the lore occasionally shoots past believability into territory that's disturbing because of how casually it's stated. Other fire Pokémon also push boundaries, if less dramatically. Some Charizard entries say their flames can melt boulders, and that an angry Charizard's fire burns even hotter than usual. Volcarona is described in some regions as a replacement for the sun, providing warmth after a volcanic eruption blotted out the sky. Turtonator adds a more explosive twist. Its shell is coated in a substance that detonates when struck, and it uses this property both offensively and defensively. Every hit risks triggering a blast strong enough to threaten anything nearby, including itself. Self-destructive moves like Explosion and Self-Destruct turn that risk into a deliberate decision. In battle, those moves reduce the user's HP to 0 while dealing heavy damage to opponents. Mechanically, it's a trade. Your Pokémon faints now but might take down dangerous enemies with it. The Pokédex sometimes frames these moves in ways that imply real bodily harm. Descriptions talk about concentrated energy detonating from inside the Pokémon, or gas sacs rupturing in a controlled blast. Even if fainting in gameplay is reversible, the flavor text paints a picture of creatures willing or compelled to use their own bodies as bombs. Recoil moves sit on the same spectrum. Flare Blitz, Volt Tackle, Double Edge, Wood Hammer, and similar attacks are described as all-out charges, flaming rushes, or full-force slams that hurt the user. In the interface, recoil is just a percentage. In lore, it suggests bones, muscles, or internal systems being pushed past safety. The idea that trainers regularly instruct their partners to take some recoil normalizes a specific kind of calculated damage. A move like Brave Bird deals heavy flying-type damage at the cost of the user's well-being, nodded at with a brief animation and an HP deduction. Underneath that, the concept is simple. Winning this exchange is worth your Pokémon hurting itself. Some Pokédex entries even reference injuries from normal movement, not just special attacks. High-speed Pokémon such as Rapidash or Zebstrika are said to leave scorched paths or sheared ground behind them when running at full tilt. If they ever lost control, anything in their path would be collateral damage. Steel and rock types often come with their own flavor of physical extremes. Gigalith contains compressed energy that can blast hillsides apart when released. Tyranitar's footsteps can reshape the terrain, and Regirock repairs itself by absorbing rocks from its surroundings, suggesting a body that can break and rebuild on the go. Those details sound impressive from a battle perspective, but in World, they describe beings walking around with more destructive potential than most human weapons. A trainer standing next to a Pokémon that can level mountains or shatter the ground for kilometers is essentially shepherding a living catastrophe. Daily life stays intact only because these creatures choose or are trained not to use that full destructive potential casually. Electric types add another axis of risk. Raichu's electricity can reportedly paralyze an Indian elephant, a convenient unit in early Pokédex text. Later species like Zekrom or Xurkitree are tied to massive amounts of current, enough to black out cities or overload power plants. When those Pokémon fight in stadiums surrounded by crowds, the setting becomes strange if you think too hard about it. A misdirected thunder could, by the lore's standards, fry entire sections of infrastructure. Protective barriers and safety measures are implied but never described, leaving the impression that everyone is trusting the battle system to keep catastrophe neatly contained. The Gigantamax and Dynamax phenomena in Galar amplify this issue. Pokémon swell to gigantic size, towering over buildings, with attacks that appear to distort the landscape. Official material explains this as a controlled use of energy tied to Eternatus, but the visuals make it clear that any mistake could mean large-scale destruction. When these mechanics are used properly, they're channeled into regulated battles with strict rules and supervision. Gym leaders and league officials oversee matches, and specialized stadiums are built to contain these enlarged forms. Even so, the existence of rampaging Dynamax Pokémon in the wild reminds you that this power is never completely under human control. The more you line up these examples, the more the world looks like a place where bodies are constantly being pushed to thresholds. Mega Evolution stretches muscles and minds beyond their resting states. Recoil moves and explosive attacks weaponize the user's own frame, turning skin, shell, or bone into a delivery system for damage. What makes it unsettling is how normalized all of this is. NPCs talk about Mega Evolution as a proud sign of trust, not as something that might hurt. Gyms use recoil-heavy strategies as if asking a Pokémon to slam itself into danger is no more morally complex than using a standard tackle. The Pokédex rarely editorializes, but the occasional line slips through that hints at what this means for the creatures themselves. Some megas are described as being in constant pain or rage, unable to calm down until the form ends. Others look and sound exhausted, as if maintaining the transformation drains them even when they're not actively attacking. Outside of battles, there's almost no sign of systems or organizations designed to study the long-term effects of these practices. There's no in-universe equivalent of a sports medicine institute monitoring the health of frequently mega-evolving Pokémon. Even the professors most interested in battle and evolution just log the forms, note the power boosts, and move on. For trainers, the incentive structure points one way. Stronger is better. A Mega Stone, a powerful recoil move, an ability that risks collateral damage. These are tools for overcoming tough fights and climbing the ladder. Any cost to the body on the other end of the Pokéball is hidden behind animations, HP bars, and the promise that a trip to the Pokémon Center will fix everything. Viewed as a whole, the lore suggests that many Pokémon live in bodies with incredible built-in capabilities, and that human partners have learned exactly how to press the most dangerous buttons. Magcargo glows with impossible heat. Tyranitar carries enough strength to reshape landscapes. Dynamax channels energy that once nearly destroyed a region. Megastones and powerful moves don't create that potential, but they do concentrate and exploit it. The disturbing undercurrent is that almost none of the characters inside the story appear alarmed by this. To them, Mega evolution and high-risk attacks are simply part of the sport, another layer of complexity to master. From the outside, it can look more like a culture that has gotten very comfortable asking living creatures to burn themselves a little brighter, for just long enough to win. Giratina is one of the rare Pokémon that doesn't feel like it was meant to live in a world with routes and gyms at all. According to its lore, it inhabits a place called the Distortion World, a realm described as being on the reverse side of ours, where the usual rules of reality don't quite apply. Rather than living in a cave or guarding a shrine, it occupies an entire layer of existence that looks wrong the moment you step into it. The Distortion World isn't just a cool set piece. Gravity points in different directions, platforms float in midair, and the landscape bends in impossible ways. What the games present visually as a puzzle zone reads, in the lore, as a dimension where physics has been rearranged around Giratina's presence. One detail that stands out in Giratina's description is the claim that it was banished. Its violence was apparently severe enough that some higher power, usually implied to be Arceus, forced it out of the regular world. Being sealed in a tower or a cave would be one thing. Being exiled to your own universe of warped space is something else entirely. Design does a lot of storytelling work here. In its altered form, Giratina walks on 6 legs, armored plates overlapping like cathedral stone and insect carapace. The origin for me strips away that solidity, replacing legs with serpentine coils and shadowy tendrils, giving the impression of a creature that only feels right when there's no ground at all. The typing reinforces that tension. Dragons, in Pokémon, usually represent ancient elemental power. Ghosts are associated with death, afterlife, and things that don't belong in the living world, so combining the two makes Giratina feel like a manifestation of something the universe tried to lock away rather than destroy. Lore repeatedly mentions that it watches our world from the other side. Nothing in the game suggests it has a physical window. It simply perceives the old world through its own dimension. That phrasing quietly downgrades the player's reality to something being observed, as if the distortion world is the real frame and everything else is the picture. Even its role in Sinnoh's story carries that weight. Where Dialga and Palkia are tied to time and space, Giratina appears when their clash threatens to destabilize reality. Intervening from its distorted realm, it drags the conflict into its own territory, almost as if it's policing the balance of things it was once part of, but no longer fully belongs to. Darkrai represents a different flavor of cosmic fear, one that sits inside the mind instead of the sky. Rather than cracking space open, it slips into dreams, turning ordinary sleep into a battleground. Official lore describes it as driving intruders from its territory, by casting them into deep, inescapable nightmares. What makes that unsettling is the lack of visible damage. Darkrai doesn't leave claw marks or scorch the environment. Its victims simply fall asleep and suffer. Anyone watching from outside would only see someone tossing in their bed, with no idea a legendary Pokémon is actively reshaping what they experience. The idea that Darkrai doesn't necessarily mean harm complicates things further. Its nightmares are often framed as a defensive response, not malicious entertainment. Yet the person trapped inside a terror loop isn't really comforted by the idea that this is just a territorial reflex, rather than an attack. Stories inside the games tell of people who blame Darkrai for feverish dreams on moonless nights. Think about what that means in practice. A whole town might go through a period of awful sleep, headaches, and fear, all because they live too close to where this being prefers to stand guard. From their perspective, Darkrai is a phantom of insomnia that nobody can argue with or negotiate away. Cresselia serves as a kind of natural counterpart. Its presence is associated with peaceful sleep and the lifting of nightmares, as if the ecosystem includes a built-in antidote to Darkrai's influence. Moon-shaped feathers and calm imagery make it feel like a guardian that never fully cancels out the threat, but can at least soften it. Together, those two suggest that dreams themselves are a kind of weather pattern in the Pokémon world. Darkrai is a storm system of nightmares. Cresselia is clear skies and moonlight. People stuck under the wrong one at the wrong time are swept up in forces they can't see, only endure. The anime leans into that ambivalence, showing Darkrai as both feared and misunderstood. Citizens see it as a villain causing chaos when nightmares spread through a town. As the story unfolds, it becomes clear that Darkrai's actions are tied to defending the area from a much bigger threat, making its frightening power a kind of necessary toxicity. Ultra Beasts shift the tone from mythic and spiritual to almost science fiction horror. They're introduced in Alola not as gods or spirits, but as UB-01, UB-02, and so on, specimens from other dimensions that scientists classify like hazardous materials. Instead of being legendary guardians of a region, they're invasive organisms with unknown rules. Nihilego, the first Ultra Beast most players encounter, looks almost elegant at a glance. Its jellyfish-like bell, flowing ribbon-like tendrils, and faint glow fit right into Alola's bright aesthetic. The Pokédex, though, calls it a parasite that injects a neurotoxin into its hosts, altering their behavior and making them act almost like they're intoxicated. In the story, that abstract description gets a very tangible demonstration. A key character becomes obsessed with the Ultra Beasts, and when Nihilego fuses with her in a climactic scene, the combination looks disturbingly natural. The creature's jellyfish cap wraps over her like a helmet, tendrils merging with her body in a way that blurs the line between symbiosis and possession. That fusion is never presented as healthy. The host's personality twists, existing obsessions spike into mania, and decisions become increasingly erratic. Players are shown what parasite that controls a host while boosting its own survival looks like when that host is a human rather than another Pokémon. Guzzlord takes the opposite approach. No elegance, just appetite. Its design is a cavernous mouth with a body attached, arms and tails built around the act of feeding. Lore describes it as endlessly devouring everything in its path. Mountains, buildings, whatever happens to be standing when it arrives. The ruined city known as Ultra Ruin gives that description a stage. There, Guzzlord roams a version of a familiar location that has been chewed down to concrete bones. Broken lampposts, collapsed roads, and hollow shells of buildings sit under a sky that never brightens, all framed around a single creature that never stops eating. Unlike traditional legendary Pokémon, Ultra Beasts aren't portrayed as anchored to myths or worship. They arrive through wormholes, mindlessly following their own instincts, treating new worlds as just more terrain to occupy and consume. The human side responds with containment teams, specialized suits, and code names like they're dealing with cross-dimensional biohazards. Other Ultra Beasts explore different horror niches. Buzzwole is an exaggerated insect with bulging muscles, flexing as it fights, a grotesque parody of strength and masculinity. Pheromosa glides with supermodel grace, but its lore calls out how it detests being touched by anything in the world it invades, as if reality itself feels filthy to it. Kartana looks almost cute at first, a tiny origami-like figure made of folded metal paper. Then you read that its incredibly sharp body can slice through steel with barely any resistance. What reads as a living sculpture is, effectively, a walking blade. Simply bumping into it could be fatal. Celestila merges alien design with folklore, resembling a towering bamboo rocket that can lift off by spewing fire from its arms. Some descriptions tie it back to the tale of the bamboo cutter and Princess Kaguya. Only here the celestial maiden has turned into a metallic being that can scorch the earth underneath when it launches. It's less a person from the moon, and more an engine that forgot it was ever part of a story. Even the numbering system used by the Aether Foundation and the International Police underscores how foreign these beings are. UB-01 Symbiont, UB-02 Absorption, UB-03 Lighting. None are given natural-sounding names at first. Scientists approach them with the same language used for unidentified chemical compounds or classified weapons. Alola's narrative shows the fallout when fascination turns into obsession. Efforts to study Ultra Beasts escalate from cautious observation to reckless experimentation, including attempts to enter their home dimension and pull them through at will. The people driving those projects talk about curiosity, necessity, and protection, but the scenes on screen feel more like poking holes in a barrier that was doing a perfectly good job of keeping incompatible ecosystems apart. Once Ultra Beasts are loose in the region, local trainers are recruited to help contain them. This is where the series' usual dynamic, the gifted child saving the world, intersects with something closer to disaster response. Instead of a single villain's hideout, you're dealing with roaming incidents, each one a collision between an alien organism and a world with no natural defenses against it. Necrozma sits somewhere between Ultra Beast and Legendary, an extra-dimensional entity whose natural form seems almost incomplete. Initially encountered as a dark, angular structure that absorbs light, it's described as having once been much brighter, casting radiance across its own world before something happened to strip it of that glow. In its starved state, it literally steals light from other realms just to sustain itself. When Necrozma fuses with Solgaleo or Lunala, the result feels like another twist on the symbiont idea. A cosmic lion or bat, already legendary in their own right, becomes armor and fuel for a desperate, light-hungry being. The resulting forms aren't majestic ascensions, they're more like forced integrations, with Necrozma wrapping around the host's body like a jagged cage. Restoring Necrozma's true form is framed as an act of mercy. By returning its light, you stop it from attacking other worlds. Yet the method is still absorption. It feeds on radiance until it reaches a stable state. The implication is that equilibrium in this part of the multiverse comes from satisfying the hunger of entities that can crack dimensions open if they're left starving. Taken together, Giratina, Darkrai, Necrozma, and the Ultra Beasts reveal a layer of the Pokémon world that isn't really about ecosystems or regional mythology anymore. This is the part of the setting where reality feels porous, where entire dimensions press up against each other, and where the beings on the other side don't fit neatly into ideas like friend, partner, or even God. Some exist to observe, some to defend, some simply to consume until nothing recognizable is left. Most ordinary people in these regions live their lives without ever seeing that layer directly. Farmers, shopkeepers, school kids, they all go about their routines as if the sky is just the sky, not a surface that can tear open into an ultra wormhole. Occasionally a strange light appears or a rumor spreads, but day-to-day life stays stubbornly normal. Chindodrainers, and especially the player character, are the ones who get close enough to read what's really written there. A trek into the distortion world makes gravity feel optional. Tracking Ultra Beasts through lonely fields and caves teaches you that not every Pokémon understands our world's rules, or cares to. The disturbing part is that the setting never fully fixes these cracks. Giratina remains in its distorted realm. Ultra wormholes can be mitigated, but not erased from possibility. Darkrai and Cresselia still drift through the night, with people beneath them sleeping soundly or jolting awake, depending on which one is closer. From a distance, the Pokémon universe can look tidy. Regions labeled, types balanced, legends cataloged. Hidden in the margins, the canon admits that there are places where the map stops making sense, and things slip through from the outside. Every time a professor mentions other dimensions or mysterious phenomena, it's a quiet reminder that the world trainers know is just one layer, and that something with too many wings, too many jaws, or too many eyes might already be watching it from beyond. Some of the darkest things in Pokémon aren't particular species at all, but the places people quietly build around death. Not every unsettling detail comes from the Pokédex. A lot of it lives in towers, shrines, and empty rooms that only exist because something bad already happened there. If you trace those locations across the regions, you end up with a world that treats ghosts, graves, and disappearances as ordinary parts of the landscape. Lavender Town is the most famous of these places, and the original games never pretend it's anything but a cemetery town. The central landmark is the Pokémon Tower, a multi-floor grave site stacked with memorials and mourners. Trainers climb it not just for items or plot progress, but because the story insists you confront the idea that Pokémon die and people grieve for them. Inside the tower, channelers wander the floors in trances, sometimes possessed by ghosts that force out strange, fragmented dialogue. Wild encounters here are mostly ghost types like Ghastly and Haunter, functioning as both random battles and manifestations of the dead. Every step you take is framed by rows of tombstones and the knowledge that each one represents a lost partner. The murdered Marowak that haunts the upper levels turns the tower into more than a generalized memorial. Team Rocket killed it while trying to harvest Cubone skulls, and its spirit stays behind to block their operations. You can't progress until you confront it, calm it, and watch it finally move on, leaving its child in the tower behind. That sequence is one of the few times the games ask you to think about cause and effect. Poachers try to profit from grief by turning bones into merchandise, and a ghost is born out of the violence they inflict. Players move on after the encounter, but Lavender never really stops being a place where that crime happened. Later games shift Kanto's graveyard to the House of Memories, suggesting the tower was converted or repurposed. On the surface, this looks gentler, like the region tried to soften the image of a giant grave skyscraper. Underneath, it implies that even the architecture of mourning changes with time, while the dead themselves remain. Other regions build their own versions of that same structure. Sinnoh's Lost Tower stands out of the fog on Route 209, a simple gray building filled with tombstones and the occasional grieving NPC. Hoenn has Mant Pyre, a seaside mountain, whose exterior trail and interior chambers are both lined with graves and wandering ghost types. Mentant Pyre mixes ordinary mourning with mythic responsibility. At its summit sits a shrine that once held the blue and red orbs, relics tied to the legendary weather titans Kyogre and Groudon. When villain teams steal them, the mountain becomes a literal starting point for a disaster that threatens the entire region. That pairing is quietly chilling. On lower floors, old couples mourn the Pokémon they've lost and talk about memories. At the summit, stolen relics set in motion storms and droughts powerful enough to drown or dry out whole swaths of Hoenn, all because someone decided sacred grave goods should be tools in a global scheme. Unova's Celestial Tower carries a different mood. It rises alone on a hill, bells tolling for the deceased, with trainers and NPCs lighting candles inside. The music is subdued, and the people you meet talk about visiting departed Pokémon in a way that normalizes the idea of regular grave visits as part of everyday life. Climbing these towers is almost always optional outside of the main story beats. The games let you ignore them if you want to rush badges and legendary captures. For players who choose to explore, the locations add a quiet layer of context. This world is full of people who come back to the same spots year after year because someone they loved is buried there. Not all haunted places are official graveyards. Sinnoh's old chateau looks like the kind of building that should have caretakers, yet stands abandoned in Eterna Forest. Spiderwebs, creaking floors, and static-filled TVs set the tone long before anything explicitly supernatural happens. Inside, there are two main ghostly figures you can encounter: a butler and a little girl who appear in certain rooms. then vanish when you try to follow. Their presence is never explained in dialogue or side quests. The game simply lets you see them and leave with questions. They don't attack, provide items, or advance the plot, which makes them feel even more like remnants of something you're not meant to fully understand. The Rotom event adds another layer to the chateau's atmosphere. Investigating the old television at night reveals that it isn't just broken hardware, it's a home for a mischievous electric ghost type. Rotom itself is playful compared to many other ghosts, but its habit of possessing appliances fits perfectly with a place full of objects that outlived their owners. That combination, harmless prankster ghost plus silent human apparitions, creates a hierarchy of hauntings. One entity can be caught and trained, the others remain outside the game's systems, uninteractable, almost like a reminder that not everything can be reduced to a species entry and moveset. Some things in that house simply aren't for you. Anuva's strange house in Black 2 and White 2 plays with similar ideas. Located in an out-of-the-way area and partially sunken into the ground, it feels wrong even before you step inside. Furniture glitches position, doors connect to unexpected rooms, and a mysterious girl briefly appears to talk about a lunar wing and a tragedy on Marvelous Bridge. Over time, the girl's lines suggest she died in an accident, and her spirit is tied to the house and the wing. After you recover the item and resolve its related side plot, she stops appearing. The building itself stays empty, its floors still rearranging, as though the event that claimed her left the entire structure permanently unsettled. Lumios's city, which most players associate with bright lights and crowded streets, hides one of the series' most understated ghost events. Taking an elevator in a certain building leads you to a floor where the lights briefly flicker and a girl appears behind you, gliding instead of walking. She says, "No, you're not the one," and then disappears, leaving no battle, item, or explanation. Nothing else on that floor changes. NPCs continue their routines, unaware anything just happened, and there are no follow-up quests pointing you back to her. It feels like a haunting overheard mid-sentence, where you only catch the wrong half of a conversation and never find out what the right half would have been. That encounter is striking because it has no explicit reward. Many secrets in Pokémon lead to legendary encounters, rare items, or new locations. This one gives you a single line of dialogue, and a memory of a presence that was looking for someone else entirely. Sun and Moon relocate haunted imagery to more modern ruins. Acerola's trial in the thrifty Megamart takes place in an abandoned supermarket on Ula Island, its shelves empty and its signage still hanging crooked. The trial revolves around taking photos of ghost-type Pokémon, but the environment is doing a lot of quiet storytelling on its own. This is a business that clearly folded and was left to rot. Checkout counters stand unused, sale banners fade, and haunted shopping carts drift around with no one pushing them. Whatever economic reasons caused the closure, the current reality is that the building became a natural attractor for spirits. The boss of the trial, a totem Mimikyu, amplifies the feeling of misplaced identity in that space. Here is a Pokémon pretending to be something popular, hiding something frightening under a cheap cloth costume, living in a store full of discarded, unwanted stock. Both the location and the trial Pokémon are built around the idea of things that didn't sell, didn't fit, or were left behind. Other Alolan locations echo that abandoned feeling in quieter ways. Back rooms in certain hotels hold people who hint at encounters with ghosts, and random NPCs discuss rumors of someone or something standing at windows at night. These are one-off comments, easy to skip, but together they paint a picture of a region where hauntings are part of the local gossip as much as weather or sports. Galar joins in with its own spectral odds and ends. Old cemeteries and foggy roots play host to ghost types like Sinistea and Poltergeist, whose very existence depends on someone leaving tea to grow cold. Graves dot hillsides, and a few buildings include subtle hints of ghosts in reflections or background elements that are never mentioned in dialogue. Even when a location isn't explicitly labeled haunted, the way NPCs talk about it can make it feel that way. Caves with stories about people getting lost and never emerging, forests where travelers report strange lights or singing at night, old shrines that no one visits anymore. All of these appear in casual conversations. Combined with the Pokédex's testimony about spirits and cursed objects, every rumor feels plausible. Haunted objects fill in the gaps between big set pieces. TVs, dolls, swords, masks, teapots, and chandeliers can all host ghosts, turning ordinary interior spaces into potential haunted houses. An inn that features a chandelier for lighting is by canon, illuminated by something that feeds on souls, even if the staff treats it like a fancy fixture. That's part of what makes everyday life in this world feel quietly eerie. Most people go about their routines without reacting to the possibility that their decor might house a former human, a lonely spirit, or a creature actively feeding on spiritual energy. Pokeballs and Pokédex entries transform these beings into slots in a system, and the unsettling origins fade into trivia. Even Pokémon centers, which are meant to symbolize safety and recovery, occasionally participate in this tone. Some games have small, dimly lit rooms at the side, lounges, back offices, or storage spaces you can walk into. Once you know how often ordinary rooms can hold ghosts, every unstaffed area feels like it might harbor one more thing the game isn't telling you about. Trains, elevators, and ships all get their own ghost stories. A long journey through a tunnel or across water turns into the perfect stage for something to appear briefly, say something cryptic, and vanish. The developers rarely resolve these story fragments, leaving players to fill in the missing pieces with their own interpretations of who these ghosts were and what they're still looking for. Mechanically, none of these hauntings threaten your progress. There is no sanity meter, no permanent debuff for having seen something you shouldn't have. The worst that usually happens is a jump scare, a brief chill, or an optional side quest with a minor item reward. The psychological effect is different. Knowing that a seemingly normal city like Lumios hides a ghost girl in an office building changes how you view every other unmarked door. Realizing that strange house and old chateau house spirits with unresolved stories makes every empty bed and unoccupied chair feel like it might not stay empty for very long. Grave sites and haunted buildings also normalize death in a way that stands out for an everyone rating series. Children's games often avoid showing what happens after something dies. Here, graves are locations you can fly to and from on a map. NPCs openly talk about visiting their late partners, keeping their memories alive, and sometimes sensing those partners' spirits nearby. The presence of ghost types in these places blurs the boundary between metaphor and reality. A trainer might say they still feel their old Pokémon beside them, and in this universe, that could be literally true. Spirits stick around long enough to be cataloged, battled, and captured, turning the lingering presence of the dead into both comfort and quiet horror. Travel maps make this blend of normal and unnerving feel routine. Lavender Town isn't marked with a skull icon or a warning. It's just another destination, like Cycling Road or a bustling port. Menpire shares a region with tropical resorts, and Celestial Tower is a short walk from fields of wind turbines and farmland. The series rarely pauses to comment on that dissonance. No professor gives a lecture about how people learn to live beside ghosts, or why children are allowed to visit unstable ruins and abandoned stores. Everyone simply seems to accept that, in a world full of Pokémon, some of those beings will be restless, some will be vengeful, and some will just be lonely enough to linger. When you zoom out, the pattern across regions is hard to ignore. Kanto has Lavender Town's tower. Sinto has Old Chateau and Lost Tower. Hoenn has Menpire. Unova has Strange House and Celestial Tower. Kalos has its urban ghost sightings, and Alola and Galar add trials and ruins of their own. Each region contributes at least one place where the game's bright surface thins and something unsettled shows through. The disturbing thing isn't just that these places exist, it's how matter-of-factly the world treats them. Haunted houses become side attractions, grave mountains double as training spots, and ghost encounters are folded into exploration like any other event. For players willing to read between the lines, the series quietly admits that this colorful world is built on top of a lot of loss, and that loss never really goes away. By the time you've walked through enough towers, ruins, and abandoned aisles, the idea of safe background noise starts to feel a little ironic. On the surface, it's all just music, roots, and random battles. Underneath, every flickering light and empty hallway might be one more place where the past refused to stay buried, and the game decided to let that fact sit there, uncomfortably, without ever fully explaining it. If you're still here at the end, I really appreciate you. If you genuinely enjoy this kind of long-form Pokémon lore in the background, feel free to like the video and subscribe so you can find your way back next time.